Some childhood wounds are easy to recognize. They come with screaming, with punishment, with moments you can point to and say, that was when something went wrong. But there is another kind of wound that is much harder to see. Nothing dramatic has to happen. No one has to hit you. No one even has to raise their voice. Sometimes the wound begins with something much quieter. A child says, "Look what I made." Nobody looks. They fall and start crying. Nobody comes. They are frightened, embarrassed, lonely, or confused, but nobody asks what happened. Eventually, the child stops calling. Not because they no longer need comfort, but because they have learned something far more painful. There may be no point in asking for it. And years later, that same child can become the adult everyone describes as strong, independent, easygoing, helpful, someone who never asks for much, someone who always says, "I'm fine." But underneath that independence can be an old question they rarely say out loud. If I really need someone, will they actually be there? Because emotional neglect does not always disappear when childhood ends. Sometimes it simply changes its name. We call it independence, perfectionism, people-pleasing, emotional distance, or simply being the strong one. And today we are going to explore how that happens, why being emotionally unseen as a child can quietly shape your relationships, your ambitions, your nervous system, and even the way you see yourself. And more importantly, how that pattern can begin to change. Main part, imagine a 5-year-old child. They are playing outside when they fall. Their knee is bleeding. It hurts. They run into the house looking for their mother. She is sitting nearby, focused on her phone. The child stands in front of her crying. Seconds pass. She does not turn around. Maybe she is exhausted. Maybe she is distracted. Maybe she genuinely does not notice. There is no cruelty, no argument, no obvious abuse. Eventually, the child wipes the blood away and walks off. To the parent, this may be a completely forgettable afternoon. To the child, however, something important has happened. Not necessarily as a conscious thought. A 5-year-old probably does not think, "My emotional needs are consistently being invalidated." The lesson is much simpler and much deeper. When I hurt, people may not come. Repeat that experience enough times, and another belief can begin to form. What happens to me is not important enough for anyone to stop and notice. That is one reason emotional neglect can be so difficult to identify. There may be no dramatic memory, no single incident, no obvious villain. What remains is often a pattern, a feeling, a way of moving through the world. The child may not remember every time nobody listened, but their nervous system remembers what it learned. Human beings are born dependent on connection. Attachment is not some luxury children learn to want. It is part of survival. Psychologist John Bowlby's work on attachment helped establish the idea that children are biologically driven to seek safety and closeness from caregivers. A baby cries because something is wrong. The baby cannot regulate stress alone. They need another human being. When a caregiver repeatedly responds with warmth and comfort, the child gradually learns. Someone comes when I need help. The world can be safe. My distress can be survived. Other people can be trusted. But what happens when the signal repeatedly goes unanswered? The body still experiences the distress. The stress response still activates. But there is no reliable person helping the child return to calm. And over time, the child adapts. This is the part that is easy to misunderstand. Children do not simply sit down and decide what kind of adult they want to become. They build strategies. They learn what reduces pain, what prevents disappointment, what keeps relationships stable, what gets attention, and what makes them less likely to be ignored. Years later, those strategies can look so natural that everyone assumes they are personality traits. She's always been independent. He's just a perfectionist. She's such a people person. He doesn't care what anyone thinks. But sometimes, those characteristics began as survival strategies. And there are 4 patterns that appear again and again. The first is radical self-reliance. Picture someone sitting alone at 2 in the morning. There is a serious problem in front of them. Maybe they are overwhelmed at work. Maybe something has gone wrong financially. Maybe they are emotionally falling apart. Their phone is lying right beside them. They know people who could probably help. And yet they message no one. Instead, they stay awake. They research. They struggle. They solve everything alone. From the outside, this looks impressive. Strong, competent, independent. But their independence may contain a hidden rule. If I never ask for help, nobody gets the chance to disappoint me. That person may not consciously think asking for support is dangerous. They simply feel uncomfortable doing it. They may write a message asking for help, stare at it, and delete it. They may tell themselves, "It's not a big deal. They're probably busy. I can handle it. I don't want to bother anyone." And that last sentence is important. People who grew up feeling emotionally overlooked can become extremely sensitive to the possibility of becoming a burden. Needing somebody feels risky, because somewhere in the past, needing somebody and receiving nothing became connected. So their nervous system finds a safer solution. Need less, ask for less, expect less, do it yourself. The second pattern looks completely different. Instead of becoming invisible, the child decides to become impossible to ignore. This is the achiever. Imagine a child who notices something early. On ordinary days, nobody pays much attention. But then they bring home the highest grade in the class. Suddenly, people smile. Someone praises them. Someone finally looks at them. For a few minutes, they feel visible. And the child may begin connecting two things that should never have been connected: achievement and love. The belief becomes, if I am impressive enough, I will matter. That child grows up. Now the report card becomes a university degree. The school prize becomes a promotion. The gold star becomes money, status, awards, followers, accomplishments, a perfect body, the perfect home, or an endless collection of goals. And from the outside, they may look extraordinarily successful. But success has become emotionally complicated. They are no longer simply pursuing something because they want it. They are trying to answer a much older question. Am I finally enough for you to see me? The problem is that achievement cannot permanently repair a wound created by emotional absence. So every victory provides relief, but only briefly. There is always another goal, another level, another thing to prove. Because the emptiness was never truly about achievement. It was about being recognized before achievement was necessary. The third pattern is the person who becomes extraordinarily good at keeping everyone else happy. The people pleaser. They rarely say no. They apologize quickly. They monitor other people's moods. They adjust their voice, their opinions, their behavior, sometimes even their personality. If someone becomes quiet, they immediately wonder, did I do something? If someone looks irritated, are they angry with me? If someone pulls away slightly, is this relationship ending? For them, social harmony can feel like survival. As children, they may have learned that maintaining connection required constant adjustment. Be easier. Be quieter. Be useful. Do not create problems. Do not upset anyone. Do not ask for too much. The hidden bargain becomes, if I make everyone comfortable, maybe they will keep me around. And this can create an adult who appears extraordinarily thoughtful. They remember everyone's preferences. They know exactly what to say when somebody is struggling. They are usually the person others call during a crisis. But there is a cost. While they are constantly tracking what everybody else feels, they may barely know what they feel. Ask them, "What do you want?" And they may genuinely struggle to answer. Not because they have no preferences, but because they have spent years practicing something else, reading the room before reading themselves. And then there is a fourth pattern. This one can be mistaken for laziness, apathy, lack of ambition. Some people do not become hyper-independent. They do not become perfectionists. They do not become people pleasers. They simply stop trying. They avoid large goals. They do not take many risks. They stay away from situations where they might deeply care about the outcome. Sometimes they accept much less than they are capable of achieving. From the outside, someone may ask, "Why don't you try harder?" But internally, the person may have learned a different survival rule. If nobody is going to notice anyway, why risk caring? Indifference can become armor, because disappointment requires hope first. If you never expect anything, you cannot lose it. If you never reach out, nobody can refuse your hand. If you never dream too much, nobody can ignore your success. The strategy protects the person from pain, but it also protects them from possibility. And that is the tragedy of many childhood survival mechanisms. They work, at least at first. They help the child survive the environment they are in. But adulthood is a different environment, and the strategy does not automatically disappear when the danger is gone. The child who learned never to need anyone becomes an adult who cannot receive support. The child who earned attention becomes an adult who cannot rest. The child who kept everyone happy becomes an adult who cannot say no. The child who stopped hoping becomes an adult afraid to fully participate in their own life. Different masks, same wound, and relationships often become the place where those masks begin to crack. Psychologist and pediatrician Donald Winnicott wrote extensively about the importance of early relationships in the formation of the self. One powerful way to understand this is through emotional mirroring. A young child does not automatically understand every emotion happening inside them. They learn partly through another person. A child cries. A caregiver notices. They say something like, "You're really sad right now. I know that hurt. I'm here." The caregiver is doing more than comforting the child. They are helping the child understand their own internal experience. The message becomes, "This feeling has a name. This feeling is allowed. This feeling does not make me unlovable. Someone can stay with me while I feel it." But imagine growing up without enough of that reflection. The emotional mirror is inconsistent. You feel something, but nobody names it. You are hurt, but nobody notices. You need reassurance, but nobody responds. Eventually, a strange question can develop beneath the surface. Can I trust what I feel? And this uncertainty can follow someone directly into adult relationships. For some people, it appears as anxious attachment. They meet someone who finally offers warmth, tension, affection, consistency, and suddenly, everything feels incredibly important. A delayed message is not just a delayed message. It feels like distance. A quieter tone feels like rejection. A canceled plan feels like abandonment. The adult may understand logically that nothing catastrophic has happened, but the nervous system reacts to something much older. It recognizes uncertainty, and uncertainty once meant emotional danger. So the person searches for reassurance. Are we okay? Do you still love me? Did I do something wrong? Are you upset? The questions are happening in the present, but some of the fear comes from the past. Then there is the opposite response. Avoidant attachment. Instead of holding tighter when intimacy increases, the person pulls away. At first, they may enjoy the relationship, but when someone gets truly close, when they begin asking deeper questions, when emotional vulnerability becomes unavoidable, something changes. The person feels trapped. They become distant. They focus on the other person's flaws. They suddenly need more space. Why? Because closeness creates a terrifying possibility, dependence. And dependence means another person now has the power to disappoint them. Their emotional alarm may say, "Do not need them too much. Do not become vulnerable. Do not trust this completely. Leave before you are left." One response chases connection. The other escapes from it. But underneath both may be the same fear. What happens if I need someone and they disappear? And here is where the story becomes even more complicated. Many emotionally overlooked children develop a skill that other people deeply admire. They become exceptionally good at reading people. A tiny change in tone. They notice it. A smile that looks slightly forced. They see it. Someone enters the room angry but says nothing. They know. A friend says, "I'm fine." Everyone else believes them. This person does not. Why? Because when you grow up depending on subtle emotional information, paying attention becomes useful. sometimes necessary. You learn to monitor the room. Is somebody upset? Is it safe to ask for something? Should I stay quiet? Is this a good moment? Is someone withdrawing? You become an emotional radar system. And in adulthood, that sensitivity can turn into remarkable empathy. These people can be wonderful listeners. They often know how to comfort others without being told exactly what is wrong. They choose careful words. They understand emotional nuance. People trust them with secrets. Friends may say, "I don't know why, but I feel like you really understand me." And often they do. But there is a painful paradox hiding inside that gift. They can notice everyone except themselves. They can recognize another person's sadness instantly, but ignore their own for weeks. They can spend an entire night helping a friend through a crisis, and then, when they themselves are falling apart, tell everybody, "I'm okay." They can offer empathy naturally, but feel uncomfortable receiving it, because giving care feels familiar. Receiving care requires vulnerability, and vulnerability may still feel dangerous. So the person who understands everybody else becomes the person nobody truly understands. Not necessarily because others do not care. Sometimes it is because they have become extraordinarily skilled at hiding their own needs. And this is where healing begins. Not when you blame yourself for being this way. Not when you suddenly force yourself to become completely different. But when you realize, these behaviors once protected me. They had a purpose. And if they were learned, new responses can also be learned. The brain remains capable of change. This capacity is often described through neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and strengthen new patterns through repeated experience. Healing, then, is not simply standing in front of a mirror and repeating positive sentences until everything feels better. It is giving your nervous system new evidence. Again, and again, and again. Evidence that the world is not always the world you grew up in. Evidence that your needs do not automatically drive people away. Evidence that being seen can be safe. And one of the first steps is surprisingly simple. Validate yourself before demanding that the world validate you. If you spent childhood waiting for somebody to notice your emotions, adulthood can become an endless search for someone who will finally say, "Yes, your feelings make sense." But part of healing is learning to provide some of that recognition internally. When you feel hurt, instead of immediately saying, "I'm being ridiculous," try something different. "I feel hurt." That is enough. You do not have to prosecute a legal case proving that you deserve the emotion. Maybe you misunderstood something. Maybe the other person had no bad intention. That can be examined later. First, acknowledge what is happening inside you. I feel anxious. I feel disappointed. I feel lonely. I wanted more support. That mattered to me. For someone who was taught to dismiss their own inner world, those sentences are not small. They are corrections. You are slowly rebuilding an emotional mirror that was missing. The second step is learning to separate events from interpretations. This is especially difficult when rejection has become an expected outcome. Imagine you send someone a message. 20 minutes pass. No response. Then an hour. Your mind begins producing explanations. They're ignoring me. I said something wrong. They don't care. They're tired of me. Notice what happened. The event was simple. There is no reply yet. Everything else was interpretation. So practice returning to the facts. They have not replied yet. That is all you currently know. Your body may still feel anxious. That is okay. The goal is not to force the anxiety away. The goal is to stop treating anxiety as evidence. A delayed response is information. It is not automatically a judgment of your value. That distinction sounds simple. Practicing it can change entire relationships. The third step may be the hardest. Ask for small things, not enormous acts of vulnerability, not dramatic emotional confessions. Start smaller, much smaller. Ask someone to bring you a glass of water. Tell a friend which restaurant you actually prefer. Say, "I'd rather do this tomorrow." Ask a coworker for help with something manageable. Tell someone, "I could use some support today." For many people, these sentences seem completely ordinary. But for someone who learned to survive by needing nothing, they can feel terrifying. Your old nervous system may immediately warn you, you are being demanding, you are bothering them, they will think less of you. But then something new may happen. They help, they say yes, they do not disappear, they do not become angry. And now your brain has received information that childhood did not provide consistently. I can express a need and remain connected. One experience will not erase years of conditioning. But repeated experiences matter. Small moments begin creating a new internal expectation. Maybe asking is not always dangerous. Maybe needing another person does not automatically make me weak. Maybe relationships can survive honesty. And eventually the question changes. Instead of, how do I stop needing people? It becomes, how do I learn to need people without abandoning myself? There is another part of this story that deserves careful attention. The people who emotionally neglected you may not have understood what they were doing. Some parents themselves grew up emotionally neglected. They may have learned to survive by suppressing feelings. They may have been taught that providing food, education, clothing, and shelter was the complete definition of being a good parent. Emotional language may simply never have existed in their homes. Other pressures can make emotional presence even harder. Work, financial stress, exhaustion, constant distraction, technology. None of this erases the impact on the child. Understanding is not the same as excusing. And understanding does not mean you must forgive anyone before you are ready. The pain remains real even when the person who caused it had no intention of causing it. But understanding the pattern can reveal something powerful. Sometimes you are carrying a wound that began long before you were born. A parent who never learned emotional connection raises a child without enough emotional connection. That child grows up, and unless something changes, the same pattern can continue, generation after generation, until someone notices it. Imagine that someone is you. Years from now, you are sitting at home after an exhausting day. You have work waiting, messages appearing on your phone, 100 things competing for your attention. Then your child runs into the room. They are excited. They want to tell you something. The story is probably chaotic. They jump from one detail to another. It may not even make much sense. And you feel the temptation to keep looking at your screen. But instead, you put the phone down. You turn toward them. You look at their face. And you listen. Not because their story is the most important event happening in the world, but because, for a few minutes, you are showing them that their world matters to you. Maybe you say, "Really? And then what happened? Tell me more." To an adult, those are ordinary sentences. To a child, they can become part of an identity. I am worth listening to. My excitement matters. My sadness matters. My thoughts matter. I do not have to perform to earn attention. I do not have to become invisible to keep love. And in that ordinary moment, something extraordinary has happened. A pattern that may have existed for generations has been interrupted. Not through a dramatic speech, not through perfection, simply through presence. Because healing the ignored child is not about rewriting the past. You cannot return to every lonely afternoon. You cannot force someone to notice what they failed to notice years ago. But you can decide what happens next. You can begin noticing your own emotions. You can ask for what you need. You can stop confusing silence with rejection. You can allow safe people to help you. You can rest without proving that you deserve rest. You can say no without believing love will disappear. You can try something meaningful even if nobody applauds. And perhaps most importantly, you can stop measuring your worth by how little space you take up in other people's lives. You were never supposed to become invisible in order to be loved. Final. So think about the 4 masks we explored. The person who does everything alone. The person who constantly proves their worth. The person who keeps everyone happy. And the person who stopped hoping because hoping became too painful. Which one feels most familiar to you? Maybe you recognize yourself in one. Maybe in several. And if you do, remember this. What looks like a flaw today may once have been a brilliant survival strategy. But surviving your childhood and living your adulthood are not the same task. You are allowed to update the rules. You are allowed to discover that asking does not always lead to rejection. That rest does not make you worthless. That saying no does not make you unlovable. That being vulnerable does not automatically make you weak. And that being seen does not have to be dangerous. Sometimes healing begins with something incredibly small. One honest sentence. One request for help. One boundary. One moment where you choose not to disappear. If this video made you recognize something in yourself, tell me in the comments which of these patterns you relate to most. Someone reading your experience may realize they are not the only person who has spent years feeling this way. And if you enjoy videos that explore the hidden psychology behind the way we think, feel, and connect with others, support the video with a like and subscribe for more. And maybe share this with someone who has always been the strong one. Because sometimes, the person who asks for the least support is the person who has spent the longest believing they were never allowed to need it.